She had no idea that her daughter had quietly slipped outside to buy a second ice cream from the truck parked across the street. When she called out for her and received no response, a sense of unease began to grow, and as minutes stretched into hours with no trace of the little girl, the parents knew something terrible had happened. The only clue left behind was Ring camera footage showing their daughter, ice cream in hand, walking back across the street. For years, the parents lived with the torment of not knowing what had happened to her, and the mother was haunted by guilt over having left her alone for just that brief moment. But then, on one fateful day, the father happened to be at a junkyard when he caught sight of an old ice cream truck, a discovery that would change the entire case and lead them to uncover the horrifying truth behind their daughter's disappearance. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Brennan pulled into his driveway after another exhausting 12-hour shift at the construction site. His shoulders ached from the physical labor, and all he wanted was to collapse onto the sofa with a cold beer. The house looked the same as always, the pale yellow paint starting to chip around the edges. The garden his wife Sarah had once tended, with such care now maintained but lacking its former vibrancy. Everything changed after Elora disappeared. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, gathering his energy before heading inside. The house felt different these days, emptier, quieter, haunted by the absence of their little girl's laughter. "Honey, I'm home," Michael called out as he stepped through the front door, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl on the entryway table. His voice echoed through the house, met only by silence. No response came. "Sarah," he called again, slipping off his work boots and making his way upstairs. The bedroom door was partially open, and through the gap he could see his wife sitting at her work table by the window. Her back was to him, shoulders hunched, her attention completely focused on something in front of her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the silver strands in her once fully brown hair, aging that had accelerated in the years since Elora vanished. Michael approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hi," he said softly. Sarah jumped slightly, turning to face him with wide eyes, as if she'd been caught doing something forbidden. "Michael, I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." He leaned down to kiss her cheek, noticing the slight puffiness around her eyes that indicated she'd been crying. "What are you doing?" "Just researching," she said, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of the table. "I just got off the phone with Officer Davis." Michael's heart sank. Officer Davis was the lead detective on Elora's case, or had been, until the case went cold after a year of dead ends. Now he only called with courtesy updates, usually with nothing new to report. "What did he say?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Sarah hesitated, then looked down at her lap. It was then that Michael noticed the tablet resting there, its screen illuminated with a familiar image that made his chest tighten. It was the Ring camera footage from their front porch, the last known recording of their daughter. 8-year-old Elora, beaming in her favorite pink Hello Kitty dress, held out a melting strawberry ice cream cone as she opened the door, as if eager to share her joy. Her mother's voice could be heard faintly from inside. Moments later, Elora stepped off the porch and out of view, vanishing before anyone could understand how or why. Michael sighed heavily, recognizing his wife's old habit resurfacing. "Sarah, you're watching it again." She paused the video, her finger hovering over the screen. "I just feel like I'm missing something. If I watch it one more time, maybe I'll notice." "The police have reviewed that footage hundreds of times. Professional analysts have gone over every frame." Michael ran a hand through his thinning hair. "This isn't healthy, honey. You can't keep torturing yourself like this." "Don't tell me what's healthy," Sarah snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "This is our daughter we're talking about. Someone needs to keep looking." "The police are still looking." "Are they? Really?" Her eyes flashed with anger and pain. "It's been 6 years, Michael. 6 years. They've moved on to other cases. If they had a child who vanished, they wouldn't stop looking either." Michael felt his patience wearing thin, exhaustion from work compounding with the familiar frustration of this recurring argument. "And what exactly do you think you're going to find that trained investigators couldn't?" "I don't know." Sarah stood up, the tablet falling onto the bed. "But I can't just go about my day pretending she didn't exist." "That's not fair. I'm not pretending she didn't exist." He lowered his voice, trying to stay calm. "But there's a difference between remembering our daughter and obsessing over her disappearance to the point where you can't live your life." "What life, Michael? What life do I have without her?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Our life. The one we still need to live." Michael gestured around them. "Bills still need to be paid. The house still needs to be maintained. I still need to go to work every day. And when I come home, I need my wife to be... To be what? Over it?" Tears now streamed down Sarah's face. "To be present," he said firmly. "To understand that our grief can't consume everything." The argument hung in the air between them, neither willing to back down. Finally, Michael turned away, grabbing his wallet from the dresser. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, her voice suddenly small. "To do something that actually matters," he said, immediately regretting the harshness of his words. He softened his tone. "I saw an advertisement for a sedan at Wilson's junkyard. Our car is on its last legs, and that repair bill would cost more than the car is worth. The ad just went up a few hours ago, so there's a good chance I can get it if I go now." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to start another argument." Michael's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry too, I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too, just in a different way." He crossed the room and gently pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a moment, two people adrift in the same storm. "The junkyard's not far," he said. "I'll take the bus." Sarah nodded against his chest. "Be careful." As Michael headed down the stairs, he felt the familiar weight of their shared grief pressing down on him. Sometimes he wondered if they would ever find their way back to each other, back to who they were before that sunny day 6 years ago when their world shattered. The bus ride to Wilson's junkyard took about 20 minutes, carrying Michael through progressively more industrial parts of town. The junkyard sat on the outskirts, surrounded by a tall, chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A faded sign reading Wilson's Auto Salvage and Junkyard hung crookedly over the entrance gate. As Michael stepped off the bus, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel lot. Heat shimmered off the piles of rusted metal and discarded vehicles that filled the yard like a mechanical graveyard. The air smelled of oil, rubber, and hot metal. A bell jingled as Michael pushed open the door to the small office at the front of the property. Inside, a heavy-set man with graying hair and oil-stained overalls looked up from behind a cluttered desk. "Help you?" the man asked, setting aside what appeared to be an inventory ledger. "I'm here about the sedan you advertised online," Michael replied. "Posted a few hours ago?" The man's face brightened with recognition. "Ah, the '09 Toyota. You're the first to come see it. Name's Frank Wilson. I own the place." He extended a calloused hand. "Michael Brennan." They shook hands briefly. "Can I take a look at it?" "Sure thing, it's out back." Frank grabbed a ring of keys from a hook on the wall and led Michael through a side door into the yard. The sedan sat among a row of other vehicles in various states of disrepair. It was dusty and had clearly seen better days, but it looked mostly intact from a distance. As they got closer, however, Michael noticed significant dents along the driver's side and a crack running across the windshield. "Front end's in decent shape," Frank said, popping the hood. "Engine's salvageable. Previous owner got sideswiped and insurance declared it totaled, but there's plenty of life left in her." Michael leaned in to examine the engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough to spot obvious problems. The engine looked relatively clean, but he noticed several components that would need replacement. He circled the car, noting the extensive body damage and worn tires. "What are you asking for it?" Michael asked, though he was already having serious doubts. Frank named a price that was lower than Michael expected, but still more than he thought the car was worth in its current condition. The repairs would easily double the investment. "Mind if I see the paperwork? Service history, title, that sort of thing?" Michael asked. "No problem." Let me grab that from the office. Might take a few minutes to dig it out. Frank gave a friendly nod and headed back toward the office building. Left alone, Michael decided to look around at the other vehicles in the yard. Maybe there was something else in better condition that hadn't been listed yet. He wandered through rows of cars, trucks and vans, some missing wheels, others missing entire front ends. The late afternoon sun cast an almost golden glow across the metal landscape, giving the junkyard an oddly beautiful, apocalyptic appearance. As Michael turned a corner into a more secluded section at the far end of the yard, he stopped abruptly, his body going rigid. It felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. There, partially hidden behind a rusted delivery van, sat an ice cream truck. But not just any ice cream truck. This one was painted in distinctive pink and blue swirls, with a large fiberglass ice cream cone mounted on its roof. Even faded by years of exposure to the elements, the colors and design were unmistakable. Michael's mind flashed back to the police station 6 years ago, watching security camera footage from a corner store near their home. The grainy black and white video had shown an ice cream truck parked across the street. Moments later, a small figure, Elora, had approached it. It was the last confirmed sighting of his daughter before she disappeared. That truck had been a crucial lead. The police had put out alerts for it across 3 states, but it had seemingly vanished. Until now. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he moved closer, examining the truck from all angles. The distinctive paint job, the oversized ice cream cone topper, it matched the description from the police reports perfectly. Even the placement of the service window on the side aligned with what he remembered from the security footage. Found something interesting? Michael jumped at Frank's voice behind him. The junkyard owner stood holding a manila folder, eyebrows raised in question. "This truck," Michael said, his voice strained. "How long have you had it?" Frank glanced at the ice cream truck with an expression of mild disinterest. "That old thing?" "A while now." "I need to know exactly when you got it and who you got it from," Michael said, more forcefully than he intended. Frank's expression hardened. "Look, I can't just give out information about my customers or vehicles to strangers. Privacy policy." Michael stepped closer to the man, the paperwork for the sedan completely forgotten. "My daughter disappeared 6 years ago. The last place she was seen was near an ice cream truck that looks exactly like this one. The police have been looking for it for years." Frank's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. "If you don't tell me what I need to know," Michael continued, his voice low and steady, "I'm calling the police right now and they'll get the information anyway." A tense moment passed between them. Finally, Frank sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "I got it a couple years back, 2, maybe 3 years ago," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Guy paid me to take it off his hands, wanted it dismantled, said he was getting out of the business." "And did you dismantle it?" Frank shook his head. "Never got around to it. Thought the materials might be worth something. Stainless steel interior, decent engine. But never found a buyer interested in ice cream truck parts." He shrugged. "It's just been sitting here since—" "Do you remember anything about the man who brought it in? His name? What he looked like?" "It was years ago," Frank protested. "I get dozens of vehicles through here every month." Michael pulled out his phone. "Then I'm calling the police." Frank held up his hands in surrender. All right, let me think." He paused, brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't remember much. African-American guy, middle-aged, maybe 40s or 50s. Paid cash, that's about all I can recall." Michael stared at the truck, memories of his daughter flooding his mind. Her laughter, her voice, the way she'd beg for ice cream on hot summer days. The thought that this vehicle might be connected to her disappearance made his blood run cold. "Don't touch this truck," he said to Frank, already dialing a number on his phone. "Don't let anyone near it." Michael's fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, finding the number for Special Agent Victor Rodriguez. Rodriguez had been the FBI agent assigned to Elora's case when it was still active. Over the years, they'd developed a relationship of mutual respect, even as the investigation grew cold. The phone rang several times before Rodriguez answered. Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez, it's Michael Brennan. There was a brief pause. Michael, it's been a while. How are you and Sarah doing? I think I found it, Michael said, cutting straight to the point. The ice cream truck from the footage, the one they thought Elora might have approached before she disappeared. He could hear Rodriguez shifting, his tone becoming more alert. Where are you? Wilson's junkyard on the east side of town. The truck is here, same colors, same design with the ice cream cone on top. The owner says he got it a few years ago from a middle-aged African-American man who paid him to get rid of it. Michael, listen carefully, Rodriguez said, his voice now professional and measured. This could be important evidence, but it needs to be handled by local PD first. I'm going to contact them now and have officers sent to your location. Don't touch anything, and make sure the junkyard owner doesn't either. Can you stay there until police arrive? Yes, of course. Good. Keep the junkyard owner there too. I'll call you back once I've dispatched officers. The call ended, and Michael turned back to Frank, who was watching him with growing concern. Police are coming, Michael said simply. We need to wait here. Frank nodded nervously. Look, man, I had no idea this truck might be connected to something serious. If I'd known... Just tell that to the police when they get here, Michael cut him off, his attention returning to the truck. Standing in front of it, Michael couldn't help but picture Elora approaching this very vehicle, perhaps lured by the prospect of a sweet treat on a hot day. Had she talked to the driver? Had she gotten into the truck willingly? The questions that had tormented him and Sarah for years resurfaced with painful clarity. 15 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled into the junkyard without sirens, though their lights flashed briefly before shutting off. 4 officers emerged, 2 men and 2 women, all with serious expressions. Michael recognized one of them, Officer Reyes, who had been involved in the early investigation of Elora's disappearance. Mr. Brennan, Officer Reyes acknowledged him with a nod, before turning to the junkyard owner. You must be Mr. Wilson. I'm Officer Reyes. We need to ask you some questions about this ice cream truck. While one officer took Frank aside, Officer Reyes approached Michael. Tell me exactly what happened today, he said. Michael recounted how he had come to the junkyard looking for a car, wandered around while waiting for paperwork, and stumbled upon the ice cream truck. He described his conversation with Frank and what little information he had learned about the truck's previous owner. Agent Rodriguez confirmed this matches the description of the vehicle we were looking for in your daughter's case, Reyes said, jotting notes in a small notebook. We've already checked our database, and there was no sale or transfer of an ice cream truck registered under the business name from the original case. If this is the same truck, it seems the owner never properly transferred or disposed of it through official channels. 2 more police cruisers arrived, and officers began setting up a perimeter around the truck with yellow crime scene tape. A female officer approached Frank and asked for the keys to the vehicle. Frank disappeared into his office and returned moments later with a set of keys. Here, he said, handing them over. I've never actually opened it myself, just took the guy's word that everything inside was stripped out. The officers put on latex gloves before carefully unlocking and opening the truck's rear doors. Michael stood at a distance, his heart racing as they entered the vehicle with flashlights. After several tense minutes, Officer Reyes emerged from the truck and approached Michael. There's not much inside. Some empty, damaged freezer compartments, a service counter, old wiring, nothing immediately suspicious, but we'll need to process the entire vehicle for evidence. Our forensics team is on the way. Michael nodded, a mix of disappointment and hope washing over him. He had half expected, feared and hoped simultaneously that they would find some definitive evidence of Elora inside. You should know, Reyes continued, based on the vehicle identification number and the matching description, we believe this is very likely the same truck we've been looking for all these years. Michael's throat tightened. So what happens now? We collect evidence, take the truck into custody, and reopen active investigation into this lead. The junkyard owner seems cooperative. We're taking his statement now, and he's agreed to provide any security footage he has of the property. A van with forensic services printed on its side pulled into the yard, and technicians in white coveralls began unloading equipment. Michael pulled out his phone. "I should call Sarah." Reyes nodded. "That's a good idea, but please ask her not to come down here. We need to work without distraction, and I'm already bending rules letting you stay." Stepping away from the activity, Michael dialed home. Sarah answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone. "Michael? Is everything okay?" He took a deep breath. "Sarah, I found something. I think I found the ice cream truck, the one the police were looking for after Elora disappeared." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "What? Where? How?" "At the junkyard. I just recognized it from the security footage. The police are here now, checking it out." "I'm coming there," Sarah said immediately, her voice trembling with emotion. "No, honey, the police said they need to work without distraction. They're collecting evidence. I'll tell you everything when I get home." "Michael," Sarah's voice broke, "if this is the truck, if this leads to finding out what happened to her—" "I know," he said softly. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. The police are taking this seriously. Agent Rodriguez is involved again. Let them do their job, and I'll be home soon." After ending the call, Michael approached one of the officers who was sitting in a police cruiser, typing on a laptop. "Excuse me," Michael said, "have you found anything yet?" The officer looked up, hesitating briefly before answering. "We've just confirmed through comparison with the original footage that this is almost certainly the same vehicle we were looking for. The paint pattern and modifications match perfectly." "What about fingerprints? DNA?" "Nothing obvious so far. The interior has been wiped down at some point, and years of exposure have degraded most potential evidence. But our forensics team is thorough. They'll find anything that's there to find." "And the junkyard owner?" Michael asked. "Do you think he's involved somehow?" The officer shook his head. "Honestly, not likely. We've questioned him extensively, and he's been cooperative. He showed us all the security footage he had, though unfortunately his system only keeps recordings for 90 days, so anything from years ago is long gone. He told me the man who brought the truck in was African American, middle-aged," Michael said. "That's consistent with what he told us. According to his statement, the truck was delivered through the back entry of the junkyard, which is visible on his security cameras, but too far away to make out faces clearly. We'll need to enhance the footage, but it's not promising." Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with the adrenaline still coursing through his system. 6 years of dead ends and false hopes had taught him to temper his expectations, but finding the truck felt significant. It had to mean something. "Mr. Brennan," the officer said, his tone softening, "I know this is difficult, but this is potentially a major breakthrough. We're going to do everything we can with this new evidence." Michael nodded, watching as the forensics team meticulously examined every inch of the ice cream truck, the vehicle that might finally provide answers about what happened to his little girl. As Michael stood watching the forensics team work, movement at the entrance of the junkyard caught his eye. A yellow taxi had pulled up, and a familiar figure was getting out. Sarah. His heart sank. Despite his explicit request for her to stay home, she had come anyway. Sarah paid the driver and hurried toward the police tape, her eyes scanning the yard until she spotted Michael. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread as she took in the scene of police officers and crime scene technicians surrounding the ice cream truck. Michael quickly moved to intercept her before she could approach the active crime scene. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I told you not to come," he said, his tone more worried than angry. She gripped his arm tightly, her gaze fixed on the truck in the distance. "I couldn't just sit at home waiting, Michael. Not for this. Is that really... Is it the same truck?" Michael nodded grimly. "They think so. The police have confirmed it matches the one from the security footage." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a small sob. "After all this time? It was just sitting in a junkyard. How is that possible?" "I don't know," Michael admitted, putting an arm around her shoulders. "The owner claims he got it a few years ago and never bothered to scrap it." Officer Reyes approached them, his expression professionally neutral, but with a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Mrs. Brennan, I understand your need to be here, but this is an active investigation scene. I had to come, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. That truck might hold answers about my daughter. Oh. Reyes nodded. I understand, but right now we need to focus on collecting evidence without contamination. The forensics team needs space to work. Have you found anything? Sarah asked desperately. Anything at all? We're being thorough, Reyes replied diplomatically. The truck was empty of personal effects, but we're checking for trace evidence, fibers, DNA, fingerprints. These things take time to process. Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly, the familiar weight of disappointment settling over her again. Michael recognized it well. They had both experienced too many moments of raised hopes, followed by crushing letdowns. Officer, Michael asked, what happens next? With the investigation, I mean. We'll impound the truck for a more detailed forensic examination. We're also looking into the junkyard's records for any information about the person who brought it in. Agent Rodriguez is reactivating resources for your daughter's case based on this new development. Reyes glanced back at the busy crime scene. For now, there's nothing more you need to do here. We have your contact information and we'll update you as soon as we know more. Michael nodded, gently pulling Sarah closer to him. Thank you. We appreciate everything you're doing. Reyes's expression softened momentarily. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, I was on the original case team. I remember Elora. Finding this truck, it's significant. It might finally give us the lead we need. Sarah wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. Thank you for saying that. Come on, Michael said quietly to Sarah. Let's go home. There's nothing more we can do here, and the police need to work. They called another taxi, and during the ride home they sat in silence, holding hands tightly, each lost in their own thoughts. The taxi driver, sensing the tension, didn't attempt conversation. At home, a strange sense of relief washed over them as they stepped through the front door. For the first time in years, they had a tangible connection to what happened to Elora, concrete evidence that might finally provide answers. I can't believe you found it, Sarah said as they sat at the kitchen table, cups of untouched coffee between them. After all this time, just by chance. I keep thinking about how many times that truck might have been spotted if it had stayed on the road, Michael said, shaking his head, but it was hidden away in a junkyard on the edge of town. Do you think... Sarah hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you think this means we might finally find out what happened to her? Michael reached across the table to take her hand. I hope so. This is the biggest lead we've had in years. Sarah squeezed his hand, a cautious smile forming on her lips. I feel like I can breathe again, Michael. Like we're finally moving forward instead of being stuck in the same terrible moment for 6 years. They spent the evening discussing possibilities, theories, and hopes. For dinner, they ordered takeout from their favorite Italian restaurant, something they hadn't done since before Elora.